Hello and welcome back to another SAE Government Technologies LinkedIn Live event. My name is Mark Pickett and I'm the Technology Transfer Program Manager here at SAE GT. An affiliate of SAE Industry Technologies Consortia, SAE GT collaborates with government, industry, and academia to solve the toughest mobility technical challenges. Specifically today, we're bringing relevant expertise to the conversation on autonomy and safety. We're here today with Mr. Nat Beuse, the Chief Safety Officer for Aurora Innovation, and Dr. Edward Straub, the Director of Ground Vehicle Automation at SAE International. But before we begin, I want to acknowledge my colleagues that make LinkedIn Live events come together and moderate the Q&A session at the end of the program. A big thanks to Charlie and Tracy. I want to welcome the audience and remind everyone out there to submit questions in the comments section as we proceed today, and we'll answer those at the end of the event. Gentlemen, welcome to this LinkedIn Live event, and thank you for your time today. Please take a minute and tell us about your role and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And Ed, always good to see you. Happy to be here and share a little bit about what Aurora is up to, right? You know, this year is definitely, I feel like the year of freight. It's definitely the year of freight for Aurora. When you look at kind of the partners that we have, the momentum that we have heading into closing our safety case, something that we can talk a little bit about later, you know, it just is a great time to be in this space. It's pretty exciting when you think about 2024 as we sit here in the US, just a few days shy of the anniversary of the DARPA Grand Challenge, how far we've actually come as an industry, you know, turning something from literally a bunch of folks in the desert to now, you know, multi-billions of dollars being spent to try to commercialize this technology. And, you know, I certainly see it as a really, really interesting time.
Thanks, Nat. Tell us about your role as a Chief Safety Officer. What are some of the things that keep you up at night or maintain your focus?
Yeah, you know, and it's a really great question, you know, and I'd like to think if I'm doing my job right, I'm actually sleeping well at night. And one of the ways I kind of get my head wrapped around that is kind of the way we've structured safety here at Aurora. So, you know, my role is both, you know, oversight, both guidance, both, you know, part-time auditor. You know, there's a lot that's baked into the role of the Chief Safety Officer. And if I were to really boil it down into kind of three main buckets, one big bucket is kind of product safety, kind of the traditional things that those in the automotive space would understand. There's a big component that has to do with or operational safety. You know, we're running fleets of vehicles on the road. We need to understand how the safety of those vehicles are performing on the road, but there's a huge human component for us right now, and that also has to be understood. We're operating terminals, you know, so all these things all fall in this umbrella of operational safety. And then there's another piece in there that really has to do with the traditional, you know, EH&S type activities. You know, we're building LiDARs, so, you know, lasers, you know, they can hurt people in the eye. There's things around training for how to ensure that when we have people show up at our test facilities or terminals that they're, you know, safe when they show up there. And then there's another piece of it, which is really around organizational safety. And this is something that is really, really, I think, come to light in the past few months around how important it is to have strong organizational safety. Another way to think about that is risk management at the corporate level. You know, how we think about the executives understanding the risks that are inherent in what we're doing. Are they accepting those risks? Are those risks being delegated appropriately? Things around safety programs. So for us, a big component of that is understanding that our employees, do they feel safe, right? How do you measure that? How do you encourage that? You know, things like safety culture. Again, these are things that we sometimes give short shrift to. But again, recent news, which suggests it's a big part of understanding your overall safety footprint.
Thanks, Nat. That's a lot of responsibility. But I know with your protocols in place and due diligence, you're going to ensure that autonomous freight is safe. I can't wait to get my package delivered with an autonomous vehicle. Ed, tell us a little bit about your role and what you do.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, and it's great to be here. And I would agree that, you know, it really is an exciting time to be involved in the automated vehicle space. So what I do at SAE International is I'm the director of our ground vehicle automation projects and work. So I work with all of the committees involved or developing standards related to automated driving systems. I do a lot of outreach and coordination with our government partners, other industry partners, and other standards development organizations around the world. It's an exciting time, but it's also a very, I guess you might say, small industry. So the people involved, and we ask a lot of the technical experts who are developing and volunteering their time for standards. And there are only so many of them to go around. So we do a lot of work and effort to harmonize standards across the SDOs, like SAE, of course, IEEE, UL, ISO, and others.
Thanks, Ed. And you're a retired Marine, I believe, and also spent some time at Ground Vehicles Systems Center, which is now, or used to be called TARDEC, working in the autonomous robotics group. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I was on active duty. I was a combat engineer officer in the Marines, and then went to work as a civilian for the Army. I worked in GVSC's, at the time, TARDEC ground vehicle robotics programs on level 4 automated vehicle systems. And really one of the things, and this gets to what Nat's talking about too, I think, is sure, there are a lot of technical challenges. I think we're really at an inflection point and about to commercialize these things. The technology has really come along. But in a broader perspective, they don't operate, automated vehicles don't operate independently. They operate in a broader socio-technical system. So being able to work with, understand other road users and the safety implications of operating these vehicles in traffic with human drivers and other road users is really important too.
Thanks, Ed. Let's jump in. I know we've kind of touched upon safety during the introductions, but safety in the commercial vehicle space is really important, right? Nat, what's Aurora doing to ensure organizational and functional safety with respect to moving freight autonomously? Could you maybe expand on what you previously mentioned?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that question. And I think you're just spot on with the question, right? The AV freight market is really kind of a business to business relationship. So if our product isn't safe, we actually don't have a business. And if we don't have a business, then we're kind of just wasting our time here, right? We won't have the huge societal benefits that we know can come from this technology, the economic benefits, et cetera. And I think that for us, there's a couple layers here, right? So one is we have to have good partners. And by good partners, I mean, we do some things very well and other folks do other things very well. So we don't build trucks. We're not interested in building trucks. There are plenty of folks that do that quite well, have done it for 100 years or more. And so we have great partnerships with companies like PACCAR and Volvo, who make some of the finest, trucks out there and account for a huge significant share of the market. And so we're working with them to understand, okay, how do we take the hardware and software that we've built and designed and integrate it into their vehicle platforms in a way that's seamless. But that's not sufficient. So the other thing you need to have someone who can build those hardware components at scale, kind of in a manufacturing facility that knows all those things. And again, that is not our expertise. And so we went and signed kind of an industry first agreement with Continental, whereby they will do that for us. And so now you kind of see how this ecosystem can unfold, right? So now we have a vehicle, people know how to do that very well. We have folks who know how to build, supplier grade, tier 1 type quality in Continental. But then now we just have a truck. So now we need customers, right? And so that's another part of the ecosystem. And so today we carry freight for customers. And what we're trying to do with those is not just science project stuff. It's really to try to understand how do we integrate this technology into their current operations, right? And so all of those things have to work together. And so when I think about safety, and when we at Aurora here think about safety, it really is our safety case. It is easy, I think, sitting here in 2024 to continue to be at a dinner conversation or some cocktail party, and someone will say something like, well, are you going to be safer than a human? And it's like, this is not a human problem. This is an engineering problem. We're trying to recreate the driving task in a way that we believe is safe. And so we start out with this concept of a safety case, and we make this very difficult claim that our vehicles will be acceptably safe on public roads. And then we kind of break that down into subclaims and subclaims and subclaims. And then each of those claims has to be satisfied by evidence, right? And those evidences need to be appropriate for what we're trying to do. And so when we look towards where we're heading at the end of this year, is to say that the Aurora driver is commercially ready to launch. And we've been actually the only company who has actually shared our framework, as Ed mentioned, because we don't want people to be surprised. We don't want people to open up the paper one day and say like, oh wait, they went driverless. Like, no, that doesn't help with the public trust. It doesn't help with leaders and all that kind of stuff. And so we've been sharing our progress since the late fall of last year. And so today we sit at an autonomy readiness measure, which is essentially our safety case, at 93%. And so we're almost there, right? And the last 7% or so is a few remaining things to do with the platform. And so we just received and will receive more vehicles that are built from the factory with prototype and kind of near launch capabilities for steering and braking, right? This is sort of, we'll call it the pre-production versions of those systems. And that is awesome, because then that will help us close the remaining 7%. And then the other piece of it is just the final, we'll call it finishes on validation around a few narrow aspects that are, kind of the gnarly ones that you really want to make sure you understand what you're doing there. And all of this are ways that we think is being transparent with everyone. But again, I think we believe that's not sufficient. So we do a lot of other things, right? So we, for example, recreated all the crashes on I-45, which is our launch lane from Dallas to Houston. And we looked at 10 years worth of data, and we said, okay, if the Aurora driver were driving in those crashes, what would have happened? And in every single one of those, there wouldn't have been the crash. Now, we're not trying to make some big, bold claim that therefore there will be no fatalities. That's not the gist of the story there. But the gist of the story is this technology has promise that can actually save lives. And we know we need to do more studies like that to kind of help bring the public along, because again, it's good for engineers to talk about these things and we kind of understand what we're saying, but the public isn't spending every day with us. The public isn't able to get in our trucks every day. And so we have to find these other techniques to kind of bring them along for the journey. And again, part of that involves working with our customers and our partners all along, because again, the goal of this is to scale and get it out into the world so we can make a difference, not have it be not used.
No, thanks. And I want to amplify the comment you made about being transparent when it comes to safety and take that out of the competitive conversation, because, being transparent about safety is paramount. And I think it's going to lift the tide for this space. Ed, do you want to comment a little bit from your perspective on autonomous freight safety?
Yeah, sure. And I'll amplify your amplification there. And that safety is really something that we shouldn't compete on. It's better for all involved if we're open and transparent about the safety and we're measuring safety consistently. So some of the work that SAE has been doing on verification and validation metrics for safety, I think will help with that. But I mean, I'd really also like to just give an additional thumbs up here to the work that Nat and Aurora are doing. They've been leaders in this full transparency with safety. He mentioned the safety case framework. And I mean, anybody who's listening now can go to their website and look at that. That's impressive, right? Early adopters of UL 4600. And I know you guys also implement a safety management system. So both Nat and I participate in the Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium, which published a best practice, an information report on safety management systems, and shared that broadly with the industry. Yeah. First of its kind, really for automated driving systems. And now SAE International is taking that up under our ORAD committee and developing an industry standard for safety management systems too. So it's a real, it's leading the way, I think, in transparency and a holistic view of safety. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Go ahead, Nat.
Mark, I was going to jump in there. I think that there's a subtlety here, and I think Ed's not giving himself enough credit, right? So there was sort of like a bunch of like-minded people that got together. This was even back when I was still in government, and said like, hey, let's figure out how we can get the L4 industry just by itself to work on some of these standards and best practices around safety. When I look at other industries, like, keep in mind, this was like circa, Ed helped me out, 2016 or so, 2017, somewhere around there. Well before anybody had any deployments, for sure. Well before, the industry's even established. You look at any other industry, that didn't happen, right? Other industries, that they all got their product on the road, and then probably in some cases decades on the road or in the air before they decided, oh, we should probably work together on some stuff. And I think that's a testament to sort of how you can move the needle in an industry with like-minded people get together and sit around the table and say, let's not compete on safety. Let's try to get some stuff done. And that continues to today. Ed can tell you better than me what the current representation is, but you'd be hard pressed to find a company that's not working in self-driving that's a member of AVSC. I think the second thing I would say to that is, when you look at the freight space, it's heavily regulated, right? You have the vehicle itself that's regulated, the operations itself, are regulated, 2 different federal agencies involved, sometime a third when you look at the states. And so all of this stuff is like a lot of oversight. So when you talk about safety in the freight space, it is different for sure. And I think one of the things that's uniquely different here is, again, we have professional truck drivers who not everybody can even get a license. It's actually quite difficult to get a CDL, right? They have safety management systems inside these companies who, work with these drivers, give them training and all this kind of stuff. So already there is a high bar of safety. So what Aurora is saying is, we're not even going to be, we're going to be better than that. And this is why we're going to be better than that. And the way we're going to explain this to you is through our safety case framework and how we think about that. But we need the standards piece to come along with it. And so that's why, I'm a big proponent of companies getting together and working on these things, because then you can point to the standards and say, like, yes, these are the standards that we're following. This is why we think they're important. And that gives everybody in the space just a little bit more comfort that, hey, there is not everybody competing on this of what is truly safety. Maybe we compete on how fast we do it, but the real the nuts and bolts of how you do it are things that we can share in a way that doesn't reveal anybody's IP, but it just gives, again, the public and broader folks at large something to grab onto that's actually real and tangible. And I really have to applaud SAE and AVSC and ITC for really trying to find this sweet spot of their traditional standards process, which, I suffered myself. It's painful for a reason. As a recovering regulator, I would like to say that's also painful for a reason. This is kind of a nice sweet spot where you kind of get the benefit of both, and measured in kind of like months, not years.
Thank you very much, Nat. Ed, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, so the safety case is really, it's a structured argument supported by evidence, right? And that can mean a lot of things. And Aurora's approach is an approach. The standards that we're developing are really the pieces, the puzzle pieces that can support a broader case for safety. So it's not necessarily prescriptive. This is the one way to do it. But these are standardized approaches for the pieces that give a lot of flexibility to the industry to really move forward, I think, in an accelerated but logical and safe way.
Thanks. I just want to maybe bring up another dimension of safety. When SAE Government Technologies had a contract with the U.S. Army Development Command to support their modernization efforts across their tactical and combat vehicle fleets. One of the focus areas is autonomous systems. And so the leader follower program is going to take the warfighter out of the logistics chain so that these autonomous vehicles can carry freight and war materiel to the front line. And so it's going to have a dramatic impact on survivability for the soldier, because when they're moving fuel and water and munitions, they're kind of exposed. And so a lot of soldiers were impacted by, improvised explosive devices on the side of the road, and taking the soldier out of that logistics chain and driving those vehicles is fantastic. So the DoD is looking at the commercial space to see what technology they can militarize and utilize in that application. So that's fantastic.
No, it's great. And Mark, on that point, first of all, got to thank Ed for his service as well. But those folks, I've had the opportunity to talk with some of them, and they're actually looking at Aurora's safety case framework as a way for them to assess products that they might be getting from other people, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? Usually the military is very much, you got to do these requirements, and it's like, you shall not pass go to go see the big general to get your permission. But having something like a safety case framework where they can present the evidence of, like, this is why we believe this autonomous system is safe, whether it be a ground vehicle, air vehicle, whatever, is actually a unique aspect here that I think is pretty awesome. Because again, as Ed pointed out, there's a lot of flexibility in how you build a safety case. That's actually one of the magic pieces of it is it allows, at least we think at Aurora, for you to scale very rapidly, because when you go to a new ODD, let's say, or a new operational design domain, for folks who aren't familiar with that term, let's say a new area you want to drive in, you don't have to redo everything. You only need to look first at the pieces that you think that are impacted by that new area, and then surgically go in and update any evidence that might be necessary, even like you may not have to, because in some cases it just might be the same. And so that is something kind of compared to I don't want to say traditional, but kind of some ways we think about it is like, oh, I changed something. Now I have to redo everything I did before. And everything you did before might have taken you 4 years to do it. And so look how much delay you've added into kind of bringing something new on board. And I think this is kind of the beauty of the safety cases. You can say, let's say if you're the military, anybody else, you can say, well, I only need the thing to do this very narrow thing. You could build a safety case around that, and that's going to look different than if you say, I need a safety case for the product to do something else. And again, that flexibility, like in the procurement process and all those kind of things, are super beneficial.
Thanks, Nat.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Ed.
Well, and I would just add that I was always a big proponent of dual use technologies in military applications. And I think this is a great example with heavy trucks, not just because for the reasons you mentioned, Mark, taking warfighters out of harm's way for logistical resupplies and whatnot, but all military vehicles at some point are operating or moving on roadways here in the States, or back in friendly lines and friendly confines. And the automation systems don't get tired. They don't get distracted. They can operate at night at all hours and support efficient movement of goods, safe operation, even if it's not operating in a war zone. Right. And then there are, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but there are other applications and efficiencies, both commercially and on the defense side for applications like moving or loading vehicles onto cargo ships, or movement around yards, yep, or drayage. Right. You could load using automation. You could load a maritime prepositioning force and not have to worry about climbing out through the roof, and a human climbing out through the roof to get in, because you could just pack them in right next to one another.
Yeah, good point, Ed. You have that experience. I'm curious. Right, right. I'm curious, other than the obvious difference of moving freight and moving people, what are some of the differences between autonomy and freight and autonomy in passenger cars?
Yeah, Ed, why don't you start on this one, and I'll chime in.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it also talks about it speaks to the application, right? So especially with long haul freight, you're looking at a relatively more consistent ODD, operational design domain, right? Controlled access highways, repeatable routes. Um, at least on expressways, you're not worried about cross traffic or stoplights, things like that. So there's more consistency with the operational design domain, less variability, I guess. But and on the other side, you're dealing with assuming passenger cars. When we're talking about them, we're talking about enabling an automated driving feature in, say, a personally owned vehicle where a person gets on and says, "Now I don't want to drive," and flips on their automation. With commercial vehicles, you're looking at professional staff support, whether or not a human is on board in the cab. Maybe they're taking a nap in the back, or there's a professional staff overseeing and providing remote support. So I think you're looking at end to end a more, I think that's one difference.
Yeah, I mean, plus one to what Ed said, and maybe one thing I might chime in is, obviously I'm the safety guy, and we've talked a lot about safety, but that was all really from the lens of the product. The macro level, and we really haven't touched on this, is the fact that, U.S. roads in general are, we have infrastructure issues, right? We have an aging fleet. I think the average age of, the vehicle is probably around 12 years. Maybe it has crept up a little bit since COVID. We had this weird thing called the pandemic. In a blink of an eye, we went from making really good progress on reducing fatalities to now seeing numbers that we hadn't seen in like 2 decades. Like we're upwards of like close to 40,000 Americans dying on US roads. And when you think about the opportunity that we have with self-driving, whether it be in the passenger car space that we're also working in, or whether it be on the AV freight space, that's a tool we should use, right? And it will take a long time for it to get ubiquitous, because that's the way the fleet just grows over time. But we have an opportunity here to reshape transportation and safety in a way that, frankly, very few times has happened before. I think when you look at these kind of big changes, automation is definitely one of those changes. When you look at the lives that will be impacted for the better, truck driving is a very difficult job. People, don't are home for birthdays and things like that. They're on the road a lot. Some companies even go through great lengths to make sure their drivers aren't in those situations. We have a chance to deliver a product that can materially improve the efficiency of their business, the safety of their business, and the quality of life for human beings, right? Like these are all things we should aspire to, not, hey, let's figure out one more thing of why we can't do this. And I think when you think about some of the challenges, and we should call them what they are, the challenges that we've had with some of the deployments on the passenger side of car things, we need to learn from those, as opposed to look at them from a lens of like, therefore the technology isn't ready. It's an opportunity to understand like where there are missteps, should things have gone differently, but maybe more importantly, how can the rest of us learn from those things? I'm a big proponent of, we should look at every incident, and figure out how we can learn from it, literally from the lens of why could this happen here, and make sure that you have the right things in place to ensure that you're at least mitigating for it. And again, I think we have a reason to get excited here, not because I'm this like, AVs are going to solve the world's problems kind of person, but more so from, I think Ed and I were at last year's ARTS in July in San Francisco, and we were talking with kind of we'll call them our European counterparts, some of our Japanese counterparts. And at one point in some conversation, I remember one of the European folks stood up and basically like looked at all of us Americans that were in the room and almost kind of this gasp of like, what are you guys doing? You actually have deployments. We've got nothing. And so, I think from that lens alone, we have a responsibility to, yes, there are challenges and differences between the two sectors, but the learnings can be applied universally, number one. And number two, we have to keep going, right? Like this is kind of a moment in time where we're kind of seeing the beginnings of an industry. And there are always challenges at the beginning of any industry. And what we have to do is figure out what is the right framework to ensure that we're continue to prioritize safety, continue to ensure we're putting the public's best interest at heart when we're deploying these vehicles on their roads. And when the bad things happen, let's make sure we have the processes in place that we actually learn from them.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I want to be conscious of time. I'm going to give you each a minute. And future destination, what does success look like for autonomous freight?
You don't get a minute. No, I think from a standpoint of being in the space a long time, working on very difficult safety issues, when I was back in government, and now working on probably what is, some have described one of the single most technology challenges of a generation. For me, it's really about a future state where we have lots of technologies in play, including self-driving, to really change the way we think about getting from point A to point B. That's really what it's all about. Transportation has such a huge unlock for everybody. I grew up in a household where we only had one driver. It's super challenging, no bus system, no nothing, right? And so the idea that you can have more transportation options for people, safer transportation options for people, is a future that I actually want to live in and have my kids live in.
Awesome. Ed, your turn.
I don't know. I think I just want to live in that world. That sounds pretty good. I mean, but in all seriousness, I think we're starting to see the indications of success now. I mean, we're seeing more commercial deployments. There are a number of companies like Nat, and there are others that are partnering with OEMs so that the integration happens from the beginning. Partnering with fleet managers and companies to move their freight. We're seeing it happen now. And I think, that growth that happens eventually one day, everyone will take notice and go, wow, when did all of this happen? Everything's moving around efficiently now. And we'll just step back and realize, wow, I guess this is success. Yeah. But of course, success will also mean continuously monitored and continuously improved. These are one of the things we pointed out in a number, I think, of our best practices with the AVSC, is that there is a continuous monitoring aspect to this, right? There's never a success, we're done. There's always monitoring, there's learning from events, monitoring trends in data, and continuing to improve.
Yeah, for sure. I said destination, but it's really a journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's get to some questions here from the audience. Again, if you have a question, audience, just go ahead and type that question in the comments section. I want to get to this one because I think it's, we touched upon this a little bit throughout the program today, but somebody writes, there are 6,000 fatalities per year involving trucks in the United States. How will Aurora's technology help reduce these numbers?
Yeah, really great question. And it's true, right? There is no doubt about that. I think we'll address it in a couple different ways. So one is, well, we have to close our safety case for us to address it, right? So that's paramount. So that's the task on hand this year, is to close that driverless safety case for a commercial launch and get some trucks on the road. And then we need our customers to use them. And so I think that it's kind of a two-parter, right? Is get the safety case closed, get customers to see the value and use them. And I have to say, like, every conversation I've been in with, whether it be regulators or our customers or our platform folks, everybody is generally excited. Like, they generally want to see this technology come to market, right? We all have the shared same value of reducing that 6,000 number, right? And I think that doesn't mean that we don't do some other things along the way as an industry, right? Like we should continue to look at the platform itself. What are some other things to make it safer? Because again, there'll be human drivers driving some of those things in some places for some time. And so I think what we'll see is more impactful kind of at the area that we're deploying. And then as deployment spreads, then we'll see more impact. And over time, we'll to Ed's point, we'll probably look back and be like, wow, when did this all happen? And it'll be awesome, right? That first truck that goes out the door with nobody in it will be awesome. But it'll be more awesome, at least in my opinion, when we have, 500, 1,000, 10,000, trucks out there that are actually doing the work and actually getting those numbers to come down over time.
Okay. Here's another question. The strong safety approach, of course, is essential for building trust with government leaders and the general public. How is Aurora approaching this trust building process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's really first being transparent and trying not to surprise people. So when I think about our government regulators and partners, it's constant communication with those folks, explaining to them our progress, treating them as sort of, in essence, equals in all of this, right? Having them understand our approaches so they can ask questions well before we actually ever pull the driver out of the seat. When I think about the public, it's kind of a similar but different, right? The public doesn't have time to sit down with me for, hours on end to talk about the safety case. They want to know what the 2 or 3 bit, top line, gist of the whole thing is. And there we have to do things that are, to use a phrase that's Sterling Anderson uses, who's our chief product officer, it needs to be visceral. And he has a great reaction when he does it. And because that matters, right? All of us know when you tell someone a story and it's very visceral, you remember it for a long time. So this is where things like our I-45 analysis are super helpful, because those were real crashes. We didn't make them up. They didn't happen in some simulation. These were real people that unfortunately died on I-45. And when we can recreate those and show people, if the Aurora driver was driving in these, we wouldn't have had the issue. These people would still be alive. People remember that. And so we need to do more of that. We need to do more of kind of breaking down it into very simple things. I think some of the work that we do with Ed at AVSC is also helpful. And maybe he wants to chime in on this question, because it's a broader industry problem, right? It's not just an Aurora problem. It's a broader industry thing about how do we continue to ensure that we're operating like trustworthy folks. PAVE is another group that I think is trying to start doing some things there where, whether it's webinars, whether it's, different events, conferences, things like that, to try to help, again, raise awareness. Because again, for so many Americans, they really don't realize this is happening. I mean, I would bet even here in Pittsburgh, many people don't know that, there's a company here in Pittsburgh working on self-driving vehicles, getting ready to deploy, when we have a platform and all that later this year. And so there's kind of a regional aspect that takes a lot of work, but it's necessary. And then there's also kind of a national part that we still got to work on, right? This is, to use a phrase you used earlier, Mark, like this is definitely a journey. I don't think this is one of these things where you kind of check the box and solve and say, yep, okay, we've got everybody convinced, move on. I think this is something that continues to evolve over time and continues to require effort.
Ed, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think so. With regard to trust and growing and expanding the use of vehicle automation, I mean, it's going to come back for me to being able to talk about this in a consistent manner, and that's one of the things that not only do best practices and standards promulgate the things we know or the things the industry believes, but they standardize the way we talk about it. And at this stage in the technology life cycle, typically standards come after something's been used and it has been around a while, right, to improve the supply chain. So you come up with specifications for nuts and bolts for the strength, the thread count, etc., to make it easier on the supply chain. Here at this stage with vehicle automation, what we've been focusing more on and what SAE and the AVSC has done a lot of are standardize the terms. So we're talking about this the same way. So there's J3016 that I'm sure everybody on this call has heard of. That's the levels of automation from 0 through 5. The Truck and Bus Automation Safety Committee is working on a new standard, J3150, which is the commercial vehicle equivalent of 3016. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We'll reference that document, but adding a number of definitions relevant for commercial vehicle automation. So having those definitions is important. Other areas that we're standardizing so that when we say something, it means the same. Whoever says it, it means the same thing, are our process standards. So cooperative driving automation is coming up with a number of standardized use cases for the application of cooperative automated driving, and testing methodologies so that we can look at these the same way. And then performance metrics, right? So we're still working on a number of performance metrics. That's not all set, but I think I mentioned with the AVSC, one of the things we talked about was a standardized or a recommended methodology or methodologies with which companies can determine thresholds for performance, right? So we're not setting it, but if everybody goes about determining those in a consistent manner, then that gives us something to look at and benchmark against.
Yeah, maybe to add on what Ed said, because that definitional piece is something it sounds easy and it's like so obvious, but extremely frustrating to get consensus around. But it is more important, I would say now more than ever, because essentially we have maybe 4 or 5 different technologies in the public conversation all at the same time, right? So you've got your, personal car that might have everything from adaptive cruise control to lane keeping, to those 2 systems combined to give you some sort of highway stop and go kind of thing. You've got some people claiming they have a level 3 system, right? You've got developers like ourselves who are near ready to commercialize true self-driving, not the marketing name, true self-driving, and connected vehicles, which, Ed, you and I haven't talked about this, but it seems like even the connected vehicle term now means so many things that even I've lost track of exactly what people are talking about when they say connected vehicle. It used to mean something really narrow. Now I think it means, basically if the car is connected to the internet, you can call it a connected vehicle, which, okay, that wasn't the original name. But, so again, if I would like to think I know a lot about this space, if I'm even scratching my head wondering sometimes what people are talking about, man, can you imagine the average consumer trying to figure out like what the heck is going on? And so being really almost obnoxiously diligent about definitions and what they mean is really important. And I think particularly, Mark, whether it's like episodes like this or, the media has a big role here, the more we can help at least use the same words to mean the same things, we at least have a shot of helping that piece of it. But man, is it a challenge? Holy cow.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we have time for just one more question because I really like this question. In a previous life, I was a tier 1 supplier to the commercial trucking OEMs. And one of the topics that we have omitted from this conversation, probably as a result of talking about autonomy, are the drivers. Mm-hmm. So, when I was in that space, there was a shortage of drivers. And so you would think that this autonomy would be at least a fractional solution for that. Do you have a sense of how drivers are responding to this technology?
Yeah, I do, right? So we have drivers, right? We have highly trained, CDL drivers. So they have to have a CDL and then have to get some more training in order for them to supervise, the development of the Aurora driver while we're out there testing on on public roads. And I say testing from the standpoint of like not how we validate the system, but how we think about, making sure we understand what's in the ODD and making sure we didn't miss anything and kind of that final check on some things. But they are a big source of information for us in a couple of different ways. One is, let's say we're looking at a very difficult scenario and we're trying to figure out like, hey, what is the right way for the Aurora driver to actually behave in a situation like this? So of course we have kind of some overriding Aurora philosophies that we follow in those cases. But then we also kind of on occasion bring in our drivers and say like, what would you do if you were in this situation? And so that's one way where they're kind of actively involved in helping us, deliver this technology to the market, both from a testing aspect on public roads, but then on some of these really gnarly questions around certain types of scenarios. In the broader space, I've had a chance to talk to a lot of truck drivers, both in my previous life when I worked at NHTSA and also in this current job. And it's not everybody comes from the same place, right? But as soon as you explain to folks like the possibility and what it might mean overall for society, like I said before, they generally get excited about it. That doesn't mean we don't need to think about, some of the, we'll call it the potentials of like what's going to happen with jobs. But Mark, you mentioned there was a job shortage in your previous life. There still is a job shortage, right? Like, Americans got very used to having packages show up at their house in like three minutes when they ordered things. And I think we're not going back to the other place. And so, that freight has to get delivered somehow, and so how is it going to get delivered? Well, there's rail, there's air, there's, trucks. And so, the value proposition here is we're able to bring freight some more efficiencies by not kind of having this mantra, which I really dislike, which is like somehow we're going to eliminate all the jobs overnight, but the fact that we're going to actually allow companies to expand their business, because there are some routes and some destinations we might look at and say like there's no business for us to go there, but maybe there's some other routes that look better. And so you kind of see this dovetailing of the autonomy with their current operations. And that's why I mentioned before, a lot of they have big trucks already and they're going to continue to buy trucks. And so those trucks, I would argue as a safety person, should have some advanced safety features on them as well, right? It's not like I want to go back where we start taking stuff off, right? No, these vehicles still need to continue to look at ways to improve their safety in parallel with autonomy being just another tool in the tool shed. And we'll see how this grows over time, because again, there might be applications where we just look at it and we say that's not something we want to mess with, either because the technology isn't available to mess with it or whatever the case might be. And so again, it's not this like panacea of like overnight we're going to have autonomy replace everything. But what we do need to work on is like ensuring that people understand what we're doing and why we think it's safe, while we continue to press on the other lever, which is like 6,000 people dying every year is literally unacceptable. And let's figure out how to use all of these tools that we now have with all these different technologies to bring these numbers down in a way that's more appropriate. The other thing I'll say is, when you talk to people individually, not we'll call it the association level kind of thing, but when you talk to people individually, at least when I talk to them, they will say things like, hey, I really understand what you guys and gals are trying to do over there at Aurora. It makes sense to me. It looks like it's going to be safe. I'm just worried about the future. And I think that's where we can just do a better job of not making the future look so scary, but it's not an Aurora only approach. We need government, we need other people to kind of come to the table and help with that.
Yeah, it's a communication problem, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. We're running out of time. Nat, Ed, it's been fantastic talking with you today about autonomous freight and safety. I really appreciate your time today. I want to thank the audience for joining and making this a success. I want to thank again Charlie and Tracy. Follow us on SAE GT LinkedIn page. As you know, we do a number of these over the course of this year. Our next event will be on April 10th at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're hosting Jennifer Tisdale from Grimm and Mark Carpenter from Grimm. The topic will be importance of cybersecurity and autonomous vehicles. And you'll be able to register for this event on our LinkedIn page. Additionally, I'll be speaking at the NDIA Cyber Physical System Security Summit coming up on the morning of May 8th in Troy, Michigan at the Troy Marriott. So again, thanks everybody for your participation. Awesome day.